From a very long time ago, when the world was still swirling with an enormous amount of formless mana, a soulless world with nothing in it, a god appeared. He merely commanded the earth to appear, and immediately mana condensed and hardened into the ground beneath his feet. The remaining mana, following the god's words, rose up to become the sky. This was the world described in the book that old Gus was reading to the boy beside him. The boy listened while offering his opinions, saying what he needed was the relationship between words and mana, which made Gus a bit annoyed. He was teaching for free, so the boy should focus and listen to the end. Hearing this, the boy sat quietly. Old Gus continued teaching. After the god had created the earth and sky, next came the formation of the moon and sun, the elements from fire to lightning, then other gods. Of course, evil gods were also born alongside them. So the creator god invented language, a language used to describe these evil gods. And that was the origin of gods and words, the intimate them giving written words their power. As he finished speaking, Gus immediately wrote a word in front of him, and the entire line of text burst into flames. This was the word ignis, meaning fire. Next was the word erase, meaning to remove. If this word was placed over the first, the fire would disappear. After the lesson with Gus, the boy visited the temple of the gods. He remembered the names of each god in sequence. Volt the lightning god, Master the earth mother goddess, Blaze the god of fire and technology, Whirl the god of wind, Sylvia the goddess of wind, Enlight the god of knowledge. The boy stopped before the statue of the god Gracefeel. Below the statue's base was a line of ancient text, not quite complete. The bright boy immediately understood they deliberately wrote it incompletely to avoid accidentally unleashing its power. Just then, a girl approached and tapped him on the shoulder. Seeing the boy was curious about this god, she explained that this was the god who governed reincarnation, the child of the lightning god Volt Master. The girl, Mary, greatly respected the goddess Master, who blessed everything from the earth to humans. Among the 6 gods, she was the most respected. Today's lesson ends here, Mary said, about to take Will home for dinner when Mr. Blood appeared, immediately showing Will his trophy, a wild boar he had specially brought back for Will. The meal was quickly served, and Will repeatedly thanked Mr. Blood. He just smiled and reminded Will that the boy was old enough now to go hunting, to get used to taking away the life of other beings. Mentioning this made Will a bit sad. Seeing this, Mary scolded Blood, saying it was too early for the kid to learn such things, and Gus, sitting in the corner, joined in agreement. Will was only 3 years old, yet he could already read books and remember many things. This was the sign of a genius. He should be studying, not hunting creatures like Blood suggested. And so Blood and Gus began arguing. Although Blood was a skeleton with a somewhat strange appearance, he was very kind-hearted. Will picked up a piece, curiously asked Mary when she had baked it. This was a secret Mary couldn't tell Will. Will understood this ever since he was born. He had only lived with these 3 people. Everyone had their secrets, many things Will didn't know yet. The curious boy wondered what made these 3 live together, and why they were undead. Will never pressed them about it, because he also had a secret he couldn't tell them, that he was a reincarnated person from another world. Going back to the day Will was brought here, when Mr. Blood, Mary, and Gus appeared, Will was terrified, thinking he would be eaten. But then Mary came and patted his head to comfort him. So Will had lived with them for 186 days. And on the 187th day was the first time Mary took Will out of the temple to see the outside world. The first thing he felt was the brilliant sunlight, the deep blue sky, the smell of grass and trees. Looking at this scenery, Will immediately burst into tears. At first when he arrived, he thought this was hell, but in that moment Will confirmed it wasn't hell but someone had helped him have a new life. Will clenched his fist with determination in this life. He must live well. Back to the present, Will's life continued as usual. In the mornings he learned swordsmanship with Mr. Blood. In the afternoons he studied magic with Mr. Gus. Compared to swordsmanship, Will had more talent for magic. When Mr. Gus lectured Will just once, he had already memorized it, and could repeat everything fluently. According to what Gus told Will, magic was important, but there was something more important: money. With money, one could have everything. Just thinking about it made Gus's hands and feet tremble, as he exclaimed that the biggest regret in his life was not being able to count gold, silver, and jewels with these hands. In the evenings, Will studied theory with Mary, learning about the monster species under an immortal god. During the lesson, Will learned that Mary, Blood, and Gus were undead who had made a covenant with that god to remain in this world to fulfill their wishes. The next morning, Will went hunting with Mr. Blood. Holding a small Will had to try hard to kill it. Then turned back to complain to Mr. Blood that he didn't like doing this at all. Seeing this, Mr. Blood had to explain to Will that he didn't like killing either. But this was necessary for a warrior. To survive, they had to put aside thoughts like Will's. Then Blood urged Will to hunt more. That afternoon, Will had a practice battle with Mr. Blood. To make it fair, Blood allowed Will to use magic. The battle began with Will keeping his distance and casting numerous spells at Blood. Yet the man was still able to close in on him. Though the battle was quick, Blood still praised Will, saying he had improved a lot, and the way Will cast magic was surprising. Hearing this, Gus laughed, saying at first he thought picking up an orphan was redundant. But now Will had become more useful. Blood immediately silenced Gus, saying he shouldn't speak like that in front of Will. Knowing he had gone too far, Gus apologized to Will right away, which surprised Will, as this was the first time he had seen Gus apologize to anyone. Blood hoped Will wouldn't take what had just happened to heart. In truth, Gus was just someone who didn't know how to choose his words, but he also loved Will very much. Will understood that. Blood turned and patted Will's head, saying he knew the boy had many questions, but now wasn't the time for Will to know the truth. He promised Will that when his body was big enough, strong enough to face the truth, he would tell Will everything. Blood taught swordsmanship, Gus taught academics, but Mary was the one who taught Will the most things. She taught Will daily life skills, how to plant trees and such. One morning while Will was planting trees, Mary approached, asking him to help her take care of the plants, as it was time for her to go pray to the goddess master. Every day there was a period when Mary wouldn't be with Will, but would go into the prayer room, and Will had been instructed not to enter during this time. Will was curious, but then Mr. Blood appeared again, pulling Will away to practice. They trained until late afternoon before Will could return. As he fumbled through the hallway, Mary coming out of the temple, holding a loaf of bread. This immediately aroused Will's curiosity. Why was the bread being carried out from in there? Too curious, that night Will opened the temple on his own to check. Before him was Mary, her entire body burning fiercely. Painful memories from his past life surged into Will's mind. He didn't want good people to disappear again, so Will ignored the flames and ran to try to pull Mary out, resulting in his body being severely burned. After he regained consciousness, Blood was quite angry and blamed Will. Knowing he was wrong for peeking, Will could only apologize and didn't dare argue. Gus, on the other hand, thought Will was quite brave, daring to rush into Mary's burning body, truly a man. Then he also let Will know why Mary was on fire. The bread that he ate every day was the blessing of the Earth Mother Goddess Master. As for why Mary was burning, Mary herself explained to Will. The Goddess Master and the Immortal God were enemies. The three of them, Mary, Blood, and with the Immortal God to stay in this world, which meant betraying the Goddess Master. So when praying, Mary would have to endure the pain of burning fire. Despite the pain, Mary prayed every day because she knew that although the Goddess Master considered her a traitor, she still blessed Will with bread. That alone was enough for Mary to continue. After hearing the story, Will understood many things. Because of him, Mary had to suffer such pain. So Will immediately asked Mary to let him pray with her from the next day. The pain she had to bear, from now on Will would share it with Mary. Life continued as usual with Will attending Gus's class. Today he told the boy about the gods, the statues in the temple. To humans they were good gods, but in the eyes of other gods, they were nothing but thorns. In the past, the war god Iltreat had waged war against the lightning god Volt. At first he was winning, but when god Volt received a blessing from his wife, the Earth Mother Goddess Master, he dramatically turned the tables. Since then, the war god had hidden himself for a chance to take revenge. From just this short story, Will understood many things. These two gods were also likened to the human world. Violence and authoritarianism were ways for humans to develop. Hearing this, Gus had to smile and praise Will, saying he was truly talented, then explained further. As Will had just said, God Volt after his victory was the god who governed order, while the war god Iltreat was considered an evil god. But if one day god Volt became corrupted and turned into an evil god, then the one to overthrow him would be the war god Iltreat. In simpler terms, evil gods and good gods were divisions made by the religious factions themselves. Will sat before the statues of the gods, entering a state of mindlessness, ignoring past and future to focus only on the present. He sat praying continuously for 5 days until Mary called him. saying the prayer session had ended. Then Will left the temple with her. It had been 5 years since Will was severely burned on his hand. If Will used Mary's prayer magic, completely healed. But he chose to leave it as it was because, according to Blood's praise, this was a medal for Will's masculinity. After praying, Will went to Gus's class again. As he grew older, the frequency of Gus's lectures for Will increased. Will had to stay up all night to complete the assignments Gus gave him, but the number of assignments increased with each day, making it impossible for him to keep up, as if Gus was hoping he would give up. After finishing Gus's class, Will went to practice swordsmanship with Blood. Today, Blood had specially prepared a dry skeleton for Will to practice with. This was the corpse of a demon that had been turned into an undead. Will was a bit afraid of its appearance, but when it dared to hold a sword against him, Will finished it in just one beat, surprising Blood. He didn't praise Will for fear of making him arrogant, but when he saw Will's nose confidently lifted up, Blood decided to give Will an advanced exercise. Their home was on top of a mountain, with a city below. It had been 13 years since he came to this world, and this was allowed to go down there. As they walked, Blood explained to Will that this used to be a very bustling city, but now it was different. Only undead wandered around everywhere. That was why he had forbidden Will from coming down here alone. Blood led Will deep into a cave, then asked Will to prepare his equipment carefully. The test would begin now. Will would have to find a way out of this tunnel, and he would wait for Will outside. With those words, Blood dropped the oil lamp into the water and disappeared. Will hurriedly cast a light spell on his shield, looking around but couldn't see Blood anywhere. Only 2 undead approaching him, forcing Will to fight against them. After defeating the 2 undead, Will sat huddled in a corner wall, reflecting. It had been a long time since he had felt this loneliness again, loneliness from his past life. But now things were different. He had 3 very skilled teachers. In this world, 15 was the age of adulthood. In just 2 more years, Will would be an adult. He understood that was why their training had become more difficult. Will was determined to bring the best results to repay them. After resting, Will continued fumbling through the tunnel. Before him was an undead. According to Gus, this kind was different from the ones he had just met. It was very proficient in magic. A dangerous opponent that made Will begin to hesitate whether to fight it or find another way. Suddenly, a determination burned within Will. He rushed straight out to fight the undead. It held a spear to attack Will. With just one strike, Will realized this one was nothing compared to Blood. He could completely win. Will jumped up to dodge the attack, then slashed straight at the undead's head. His sword broke in half upon impact, but the undead also died right after. Will began to worry. Without a weapon, how could he continue now? At this point, he noticed the spear the undead was holding. Will picked it up to check and found a line of text engraved on the spear's shaft. This was an item from the dwarf race, better than nothing. Will took the spear and continued on his way. As he walked, he assessed everything. And desolate place, it had likely been 10 to 20 years without people here. So where did Will come from, he wondered. Just then, a wind blew from behind Will, startling him. Will turned around to check and saw Gus. Thinking he had come to pick him up, Will happily ran over to ask about the situation. But for some reason, Gus said nothing and cast a spell to create a golem to attack Will, surprising him. Looking at his eyes, Will had to sweat. Gus was serious. Will struck back immediately with a spear thrust into the core of the golem, turning it back into ordinary stone. But Gus's attack wasn't over. Stones enchanted by Gus shot at Will, followed by numerous other spells. Will could only run while casting counterspells, but Gus's casting speed was too fast, faster than Will's dispelling speed. Will was hit and fell, rolling over. He tried to stand up and run away, but that didn't last long either. Will wondered why Gus wanted to kill him. No, he didn't want to die. Will turned back with the spear in hand, his will to life. He rushed forward with the intention of killing Gus in return. But in the end, Will still couldn't do it. Will dropped the spear and stopped fighting, because he knew Gus was still holding back. He was doing this for some purpose. If he wanted to kill Will right away, with Gus's fire magic, he could completely burn everything, causing Will to either suffocate to death or be crushed by falling ceiling rocks. Will was now crying. He considered the 3 as his family. If he had to hurt them or die, he would rather choose death. Will looked up at Gus, and somehow Gus laughed, patted his head, and praised Will. He had completed today's lesson very well, with nothing to criticize. Then Gus led Will out of the tunnel. After this incident, Will became even more certain that this ancient city and those 3 people must be related to his birth. The spear that Will got from the undead was named Moon. The lines of text engraved on the blade and shaft were magic. The blade allowed it to emit light, while the shaft allowed it to contract and expand freely. Will really liked this. The first magic weapon he had. From then on, the frequency with which Blood took him to the ruins for practice increased, while Gus's lessons decreased, making Will wonder. So Gus gave him another practical assignment, to go down to the underground pipes and find some coins. At first, Will thought Gus was about to teach him something very interesting, only to find that the coins he brought back were used by him and Blood for gambling. At that time, Will hated this game, but when teased by Gus and Blood, Will jumped right in to play with them until Mary discovered the 3 and scolded them all. After Mary left, Will stayed with Gus. In recent years, he had been observing astronomy to kill time. On the day of Will's coming-of-age ceremony, he would have to fight a match with Blood, and Gus wanted to ask Will a favor, to deliberately lose the match without letting Blood know the truth. Will immediately refused, saying this wasn't like Gus at all. Everything must have a reason. If Gus would tell him the reason, he would accept defeat, but in the end, apologized to Will. It was something he couldn't tell the boy. Afterwards, Will went to the church to think about this. At that time, Mary and Blood appeared. They came to hear Will's choice. When the coming-of-age ceremony took place, Will would have to choose a god to worship. At first, Will was planning to choose according to the gods that the 3 of them worshipped, but Mary stopped Will. It wasn't important that Will follow them. What was important was which god Will wanted to be most like. According to Will's reverence, that god would bless him. The greater the blessing, the higher the risk that would come with Will. He could completely become a hero, or it could make Will have a difficult life, so Mary hoped Will would think very carefully about this matter. That afternoon, while Will was practicing on the horizontal bar, Mr. Blood came looking for him. Will thought he would give him another training exercise, but no Blood came to find Will to invite him for a drink. Since Will was still too young to drink alcohol, Blood had mixed in some honey water. Will was a bit worried Mary would find out. Blood's encouragement that he was almost grown up and needed to get used to it gradually, Will decided to drink with him. After a drinking session, both were somewhat tipsy, so Blood immediately started a game to test courage. First was to spy on Mary changing clothes. They crept to Mary's door, with Blood straining his eyes to peek, but Will didn't like this. He rushed straight into Mary's room, startling her into slapping him right in the face. Will woke up early the next morning with a handprint on his face. Now that he was older, seeing Mary change clothes had awakened instincts in him. Will had to rush to the well to wash his clothes, which Blood discovered and burst out laughing, teasing him. After finishing the laundry, Will began his sword training exercises again. His coming-of-age ceremony was approaching. When the match with Blood ended, it would be time for Will to leave the temple. Will remembered Gus's request and didn't know whether to help him or not. At this moment, Mary came to Will, carrying a new suit of armor to give him. While putting it on, curiously asked which god he would choose to worship. Will smiled back at Mary, saying he had already made his decision. He would win today's match. After putting on the armor, it was time for Will to go to the dueling place with Blood. Before starting, Blood explained the rules to Will again. They were simple. Fight until one side loses the ability to fight. Will put on his helmet and took a defensive stance. The match began with Blood rushing to attack him continuously, forcing Will to bend his back to defend. Blood attacked relentlessly like a storm. Will knew that just one hit would end the match, so he jumped back, threw a dagger at Blood, and used that opportunity to approach him. Still unable to succeed, Will had to find another way. Blood's cutting force was too strong. Charging directly offered no chance. There was only one way left. This time, Will changed tactics and charged straight into Blood's attack. With the shield in his hand, he skillfully deflected Blood's attack slightly, then used Blood's blade to jump up and knock him down. Preparing to deliver the finishing blow, Blood grabbed him by the neck and threw him backward. In a difficult position, Will still tried to launch an attack. Blood's sword was already at his neck, but Will looked back. He was sure he had hit Blood. Looking more carefully, he saw his sword had pierced through Blood's ribs. Knowing he had no more chances, Will accepted surrender. At this point, Mary ran over to scold Blood. She had forbidden him from using that technique. Hearing this, Blood pretended to ignore her and not admit it. So Mary explained to Will. The technique Blood had just used was one he performed while still alive, using his own ribs to pin the opponent's sword, then using that opportunity to counterattack. This technique was too negative, so she had forbidden Blood from using it. After the battle, Will sat down with the two of them. Everything they could teach, they had already taught Will. Now it was time for Will to go out on his own. At this moment, Will smiled in gratitude and called them mother and father, which surprised both Blood and Mary, saying he had nothing to give Will except this sword, which he drew and handed to Will. This would be proof of Will's adulthood. Will took it and drew it to examine. Blood continued explaining to Will. This sword was called Mundane Eater, a magic sword ranked among the most powerful. Because the characters engraved on it were very difficult to understand, he would explain briefly to Will. This sword had the effect of restoring the user's vitality after each slash, meaning the more Will fought, the more advantageous it would be for him. But Blood had a piece of advice for Will. Don't rely too much on this sword, because the more he relied on it, the weaker he would become. That's why it was called a demon sword. Now that the sword had been passed on, the coming of age ceremony was over. It was also time for Will to know the truth. With Mary's permission, Blood began to tell the story, a story of a legendary king and demons, and why the three of them had raised Will. The story went back 200 years, when the King of Demons had caused a war on this continent. Everywhere, using human flesh and blood as sacrifices for their primal god. And the King of Demons, a madman with the ability to create soldiers from his own flesh and blood, had used the demon sword that Will was now holding. Nothing but cutting could wound him. One by one, regions had fallen. In the most hopeless moment, when no one dared to think of overthrowing him, the wandering sage named Gus appeared, bringing a prophecy to everyone. It was time to overthrow the Demon King. Hearing this, Will immediately understood everything without Blood needing to explain further. Gus's plan was simple: infiltrate the tunnel under the ancient city, then take the opportunity to steal the Demon King's sword. The Demon King wasn't immortal. He created his army from his own flesh and blood, then recovered using the demon sword. If they could steal it, Gus's team could completely defeat him. Speaking to this point, Blood stopped Will. Will was truly a genius, but he was wrong about the ending. They couldn't defeat the Demon King when they thought they had concealed his full power. That was also the first time Blood had suffered a miserable defeat in a sword fight. If they couldn't kill him, they had to seal him away. Mary and Gus had worked together to do that. Fortunately, it worked. At this point, the echo of the god Stagnate suddenly reached them. With the Mundane Eater, the Demon King could completely kill a god, so their sealing of him made Stagnate thank them. Then she had a negotiation with them. Because all three were excellent, she wanted them to become guardians of the Demon King's seal by turning them into undead. It was said to be a negotiation, but in truth, there was no other choice. The three Gus, Mary, and Blood had become undead and protected this seal until now. For 200 years, they had been protecting this place. Because Gus had created a protective barrier, they didn't know whether humans outside were still alive or extinct. Then one day, Will came to them. He was brought by demons. Seeing this, Gus had strongly objected, but Mary and Blood still decided to take Will in and raise this. Will already had an idea in his mind. To repay their kindness in raising and teaching him, he would go out to learn more things, find more friends, and someday he would definitely return to restore this city. At this moment, Mary suddenly stood up and hugged Will, saying very sad words that made Will a bit confused. Why did it sound like an eternal separation? Just then, the sky suddenly darkened. From above, the god Stagnate descended. According to the agreement, Mary and Blood would be taken away by him. Will fell to his knees under the tremendous pressure of the god. He couldn't do anything. At the most critical moment, Gus appeared. He shouted for Will to quickly take Mary and Blood away. He would stay behind to cover for them. Gus began to chant numerous spells at Stagnate, doubling spells, then tripling, then quadrupling, which greatly surprised Will. The amount of mana Gus emitted was extreme, more than when Will had fought him, plus the quadrupling spell. This should have been a spell that required several people to cast together. Yet chanted it, and was able to bind the evil god Stagnate. For the final blow, Gus unleashed a storm that blew the evil god away. Afterward, he turned to check on Will's group. Mary and Blood still retained their souls, making Gus think everything was fine. But no, the very next second, he was cut in half. Mary and Blood were no better off. Stagnate approached Gus, picking him up. What had just happened was only one of his avatars. But being able to destroy that avatar meant Gus was truly a great mage. He didn't want to lose such a powerful servant as Gus, so he set him aside for now. Next, he called to Will. Will stood frozen in fear, unable to do anything. Stagnate approached, laughing and thanking Will. About the covenant with Mary, Gus, and Blood, he explained more clearly for Will to understand. Initially, they were turned into undead to protect the seal on the Demon King. However, once they lost their hatred and obsession with the Demon King, the covenant would end, and they would become loyal servants of Stagnate. Mary and Blood had stopped being attached, though Gus still retained a bit. Now Stagnate offered Will a covenant, become undead, and Will would be able to live with the three of them again. But to have him answer immediately would be boring, so he gave Will until tomorrow evening, when the sun's destructive power faded. He would come to hear Will's answer. With those words, Stagnate vanished into nothingness. That night, it rained heavily. Will carried his family home. Now he understood everything, understood why Gus had tried to kill him, understood why he wanted Will to deliberately lose the duel. All of it was to maintain their obsession with the Demon King. They did everything for him, yet Will had lived carefree over Gus's troubles, over Mary and Blood's sacrifices. Will fell to his knees, sobbing uncontrollably. He couldn't do anything, couldn't repay their kindness in raising him. The next morning, Will woke up dreamily to find the three beside him. Although they were still laughing and talking happily with Will, he knew they were just pretending to be okay. Will to quickly leave this place, Will revealed his biggest secret to them. He told them about retaining memories from his past life, how he had been a piece of trash who caused trouble for his family. Even in this life, he still couldn't do anything and had caused problems for the three of them. Will bit his teeth and cried. At that moment, Mary slapped Will in the face, then set him straight. She wouldn't allow Will to call himself trash. After all the efforts Will had made in this life, what did past life memories matter? Had Stagnate's threat frightened Will that much? Mary scolded Will thoroughly, then forced him to stand up straight. Blood and Gus joined in to encourage Will as a man. Will always had to be strong and not cry like that. Thanks to those words, Will found his resolve and extremely strong determination to protect his family. So Will went to the temple, knelt before the statue of the omnipotent lightning god Volt, and declared that from now on, he would fight against the evil gods to protect his family. If the gods could hear his prayer, he hoped they would bless him. With these words, Will prepared his things to meet Stagnate. Before him, Will declared that he would not serve Stagnate in any way. Hearing this, Stagnate understood that Will was challenging him. There was no way a god would refuse to fight. But first, he needed to see if Will was qualified to challenge him. Immediately, Stagnate summoned countless undead to fight Will. An immortal god controlling undead. No matter Will, with the spear in his hand, declared that he would defeat anyone who stood in his way. Will fought while casting spells to deal with the undead. Noticing one preparing a magic spell, Will immediately cast a speed-enhancing spell to deal with it instantly, surprising Stagnate somewhat. Fighting alone against hundreds of undead like this was quite impressive. At this point, Stagnate stopped the undead. He was very impressed with Will's abilities and wanted him to become a general in his army even more. Then came a brainwashing attempt to turn Will to his side, to create an eternal world together. Will maintained his stance while listening. This evil god contained no lies. It seemed he was expressing his true wish. Stagnate took out a cup and a knife, cut his hand, poured blood into the cup, and invited Will to drink. Drinking his blood would make Will immortal. Will put down his spear and approached Stagnate. It seemed he had accepted, but no, Will drew the mundane eater and cut off Stagnate's hand. With the sword's ability, Will could completely inflict damage on the evil god. But that was as far as it went. The blood from Stagnate's cup turned into a snake, wrapping around Will's legs and making him fall backward. It delivered another blow, causing Will to gradually lose consciousness. He woke up in a still lake. At that moment, a girl with a lamp approached Will. At first, Will was a bit dreamy, but he quickly remembered this was the goddess of light, the goddess who had led him to that world. The goddess of light approached Will, curiously asking why he had refused Stagnate's offer. Will honestly shared with her. In his past life, he had been a failure, living without purpose, from being dead. Since coming to this world, Will had been determined to live carefully, to die properly. Living immortally like Stagnate would be no different from returning to the person he was in his past life. Will was determined to live well, to live with the three people he considered family, and to die with them. That was why he refused the evil god's offer. Will's sincere words and determination made the goddess of light, Gracefeel, acknowledge him. She extended her hand to help Will stand up, declaring that from now on, she would become Will's guide, helping him overcome difficulties, as long as Will still remembered the weight of the words he had just spoken. Will woke up and immediately took a defensive stance, amid Stagnate's mockery. At this moment, Will clasped his hands in prayer to the goddess of light, making Stagnate jump. The blessing technique immediately Will's body burst into flames. This was the holy fire that he and Mary had endured when praying for bread. Having become used to it, it was nothing to him now. Receiving Gracefeel's blessing, Will stood up, deep breath, and declared that he would spend his entire life with the demon sword in hand. He would kill all evil to protect the world, and the first proof of his oath would be this evil god. Hearing this, Stagnate became furious. If Will had already been blessed by Gracefeel, then he had no more value to him. He ordered his undead army to attack Will. With just a single blow, Will completely wiped out the undead, making Stagnate pale. The torch technique became a technique that gave death peace. This was exactly counter to his abilities. Now that his undead army was gone, only Stagnate remained. Will used acceleration to rush up and attack Stagnate. After a powerful strike, he couldn't see him anywhere. Will was still very careful, looking around for fear of a sneak attack. At this point, the goddess Gracefeel appeared and tapped Will on the shoulder. This was a guide Will tried to calm down and remember, then suddenly realized he was very far from the temple. Will fearfully cast acceleration and ran back as fast as he could, because what Stagnate was aiming for was the lives of Blood and Mary, not his. At this point, Will no longer cared about Stagnate. The important thing was to protect Mary and Blood. The evil god was an immortal god. As soon as he knew Will had been blessed by the goddess of light, he had considered that Will might be able to return Mary and Blood to the cycle of reincarnation. So he deliberately misled Will and headed toward the temple. Will rushed into the temple. Before him was Gus, who was being hung up high, while Stagnate was already standing right in front of Mary and Blood. Will had used all his strength to rush forward, but he knew it was too late. Even with borrowed power from the divine, he still couldn't save them. Just as Stagnate's hand was about to touch them, suddenly a flash of light appeared, dispersing his hand. It was the goddess master she had manifested to save Mary and Blood. After smiling at Mary, she vanished. Mary looked on and burst into tears, and Will also understood the issue. From the beginning, the goddess master had never, nor had she taken away her blessing. In the most dangerous moment, she had even temporarily manifested to protect Mary. Indeed, Mary's kindness had been reciprocated, thanks to the goddess master helping to block Stagnate for a moment. This was Will's opportunity. With the demon sword and the blessing of the goddess Gracefeel, Will could completely return Mary and Blood to the cycle of reincarnation. He slashed his sword straight toward them, of course. He had no intention of attacking his parents. He simply knew that Stagnate would rush out to block it. As expected, he did, and just as the techniques of both sides cancelled each other out, from behind, Blood rose up to attack him. This surprised Stagnate. He wanted to cast a spell to gain the advantage, but Gus's shout rang out with a silencing charm that prevented him from casting any more spells. Will's golden opportunity had arrived. He rushed forward, slashing repeatedly at Stagnate. Despite the pain, Stagnate still cursed Will, but Will didn't care. He pointed his sword at and declared that in the name of the goddess Gracefeel, he would live and die as a human. The evil god's body vanished, and Will fell to his knees, panting. Reflecting, Will realized that everything he had applied in this battle was from Mary, Blood, and Gus's teachings. Without their guidance, he certainly couldn't have won. It was good that he had now driven away the evil god. Afterward, Mary and Blood ran over to encourage Will. Gus also flew down from above. Seeing Will's teary eyes, Blood immediately wanted to throw a party to celebrate this victory for Will. Gus joined in right away, even bringing out his 2,000-year-old precious wine. This time, Mary didn't stop Will from drinking, but she still gripped Will's shoulder tightly, warning him that if he got drunk, he'd get a scolding. Gus happily ran off to prepare first. Blood and Mary also wanted to follow but couldn't stand up. At this point, Blood sighed deeply. Although he wanted to last one more night, it wasn't possible. An undead who had lost their worship of the immortal god, the will to continue living, could no longer stay in the human world. To prevent Will from being sad, Blood offered words of encouragement. There was nothing to be sad about. Parents should die before their children. They had been living astray for 200 years. It was time to rest in peace. Although Will knew this, he still couldn't accept it. He had sworn he would save them. Someday when he returned, he still wanted to see Blood and Mary again, wanted to practice sword fighting with him, wanted to do housework with Mary, and when he had a family, Will also wanted them to teach his children, just as they had taught him. Will burst into tears, refusing to accept this. Hearing this, Mary immediately stroked Will's cheek to comfort him. There was nothing to be sad about. She wouldn't allow Will to be so stubborn. This was their final moment, and they didn't want Will to be sad anymore. Then came the final instructions from them as Will's parents. Will listened with teary eyes. These were his parents' admonitions, and he swore to remember them for life. They would be the light at the end of the goddess Gracefeel had given him. Afterward, Gus also brought the wine. This was the first time the four of them drank together. The first cup was also the last cup. It was both strong and heartbreakingly unbelievable. The party ended with the goddess of light, Gracefeel, appearing to guide the souls of Mary and Blood away. The next morning, Will built a tomb for the two. Standing before his parents' grave, he clasped his hands in prayer and promised this would only be a temporary separation, regardless of whether they were still here or not. This was still where Will belonged, and when he had more friends and family, Will promised to bring them back here to visit the two. Gus appeared behind Will. Will took the opportunity to tease him. At this point, Gus threw Will a bag of money. This was the treasure he had kept for 200 years. Money that didn't circulate was like death. Gus hoped Will would use it for good purposes. Next, he revealed more truth to Will. Last night, he had negotiated with Gracefeel. The seal on the Demon King still it, so he was allowed to live for another 10 years before entering reincarnation. As for the goddess Gracefeel, just by intervening in Gus's life and death, she had also lost quite a bit of power. So from now on, her faith and development would completely depend on Will's efforts. Will went to get his things and prepared to leave. Before going, Gus still kept him for a moment. To live in the outside world, Will needed a full name. Mary and Blood had already given him his first name, so Gus wanted to give Will a surname. According to human customs, parents would use their own names to give to their children, so from now on, Will would be named William Meriblood. Will smiled and thanked Gus. He extremely liked this name. Going back 200 years, when Gus's group's battle with the Demon King broke out, the brave Blood had defeated the undead outside the city, while Mary took care of praying for them to depart peacefully. Everything had happened according to Gus's plan. Standing on the hilltop, Blood looked far and wide into the city. Perfect. They had done everything possible and could only delay for 5 days. If they couldn't defeat the Demon King within those 5 days, they would lose. This was a very dangerous battle, so Blood asked Mary to stay behind and not follow him anymore. Mary immediately refused. She threatened that if Blood didn't let her go, she would cut her throat and commit suicide right now. With no other choice, Blood had to agree. Perhaps this was their last time together, so Blood finally revealed what he had been hiding in his heart. He proposed to Mary at that very moment, with a vow that if they could return safely, they would marry. On the way down to the city, the two also painted a vision of having children together, a child with Blood's powerful swordsmanship, Mary's steadfast and careful will, and outstanding magical talent like Gus. He had already thought of a name for that child. The child would carry the will of the helmet and armor, and its name would be William. After leaving the city, Will had encountered many demons on the way. However, as someone and having fought with a god, Will didn't even bother counting these demons. Will walked along the stream. He had been walking for a long time but hadn't met anyone yet. It was raining, so Will ducked into a nearby pavilion to rest. Cold and lonely, Will felt a bit sad. After the rain stopped, Will continued on his journey, still following the stream, and finally discovered a new city. Will eagerly ran down to check. This place was ancient and seemed to have been abandoned for a very long time. In the middle of the city was a very large hole, which appeared to be the remnant of an extremely powerful magic spell. After making sure the city had no people left, Will went to the riverbank to pray to the goddess Gracefeel, asking her to guide the wandering souls in this city back to the cycle of reincarnation. Having finished here, Will continued on his journey. The bridge across the river had long collapsed, so Will couldn't cross immediately and had to stay for another night. His food supplies were also gradually depleted. Although with his blessing skill he still had bread to eat, he wanted to meet humans more. The next morning, Will still followed the river, with the belief that he would eventually meet humans. Just then, there was a rustling sound in the bushes. Was it a demon? Will hurriedly drew out his spear for defense. From inside came a wild boar charging toward him. Will was startled and stabbed it once in the body. Just as Will was preparing to deliver the finishing blow to the wild boar, he detected someone behind him. He turned to check and saw someone aiming a bow and arrow at him. Judging by the arrow embedded in the wild boar's body and the arrow this person was holding, they seemed to be from the same source. With much difficulty, Will had finally met a person. He didn't want to turn their first meeting into a battle, so he began to rack his brain thinking about what to do now, how to act so the other person wouldn't attack him first. Will observed the person on the rock very carefully. From the symbols on his clothes, Will had guessed his identity, so Will started a conversation with him in the Elven language. Thanks to this, the person lowered to Will. He informed Will that the wild boar behind him was his prey, and Will had interfered with his hunt. Will instinctively wanted to apologize, but he quickly covered his mouth. This was a habit from his past life. He couldn't be too submissive like that, so Will smiled at the man, reasoning that since he had delivered the finishing blow to the wild boar, he wanted a share of its bounty. Because Will spoke very pleasantly, the other man agreed. They divided and butchered the wild boar together, distributing the head, thighs, arms, and legs very fairly. However, the wild boar's internal organs had to be eaten immediately, so the two had an outdoor BBQ together. While the man went to get firewood, Will used magic to light the fire. For now, he still didn't want others to know he could use magic. Before eating, Will didn't forget to pray for the blessing of the gods. He prayed so much that the other man had to grimace and exclaim that Will was truly a strangely devout person. At the end of the meal, before the man was about to leave, Will asked him. According to what he told Will, the place where they were standing was the Beast Forest, which was already the boundary of humanity. Looking at Will's strange dress and behavior, the man guessed he was an explorer. Will just accepted it to get it over with. So the man showed Will the path along the river. If he walked for 2 more days, Will would reach a small village. At this point, Will curiously asked the man's permission to visit his village. This question made him uncomfortable, and he firmly refused to let Will go with him or talk to him anymore. Will watched as the man walked away, then shouted out his own name. The man also perfunctorily responded to Will. That night, Will camped by the stream, still thinking about this mental fellow. Elves had very long lifespans, so he was likely much older than Will, but Will still felt very happy to have talked with him. After eating, Will went to bed. He sank into a dream, and then suddenly woke up when he saw a prophecy from Gracefield for him, saying that Menel's village was being drawn into some kind of war. Will heard and followed. With the magic of pathfinding, Will quickly found the village from his dream. It seemed this place had not yet been attacked, as there were still 2 soldiers on patrol. Will was about to run out to introduce himself to them when he suddenly detected danger. Will rushed forward, using his shield to block an arrow for the 2 soldiers. He was shocked to realize that the arrow that had just been shot was identical to the arrows Menel used. Only now did Will see how naive he had been. Menel wasn't a victim but the perpetrator of this massacre. From the rooftop, Menel drew his bow and shot at Will, who still held up his shield to protect the 2 soldiers. As soon as the 2 soldiers raised the alarm, Menel's attack group ran away. Of course, Will wouldn't allow them to escape so easily. He accelerated his body to chase after and block Menel's path. Seeing Will, Menel used magic to cause an earthquake under Will's feet. Will responded immediately with a powerful stomp on the ground, dispelling Menel's magic, which greatly surprised him. Menel can their magic to attack Will, yet Will slashed through his magic with 1 sword strike. Now Menel was sweating profusely, too late to run away. Will rushed forward, thrusting the shaft of his spear into Menel's stomach, knocking him unconscious, then used his binding skill to tie them all up. After it was over, the soldier Will had saved approached to thank him. He introduced himself as John, then explained everything that was happening here. This place was the Beast Forest, under the Fertile Kingdom, a chaotic place the kingdom didn't bother with. Next was about the attack group led by Menel. John recognized him immediately since Menel was a quite well-known hunter who lived in the neighboring village. Before, they had lived very peacefully. John didn't understand why they suddenly attacked them. At this point, the village headman Tom appeared to thank Will for his help. He calmed the villagers first, then wanted to wake up the attackers to question them about what had happened before deciding how to deal with them. After the interrogation, everyone learned that Menel's village had been attacked by demons. It was now just chaos, with houses destroyed and no food left. That was why Menel had proposed raiding. He took all the responsibility upon himself, asking Tom to spare his comrades. Of course, this robbery couldn't be forgiven. Although Tom was sympathetic, he still had to hang them. Will stood quietly in a corner, observing. For people without direction, if they were released, they would just go back to stealing. Hanging them was a reasonable choice. However, Will's mother, Mary, had taught him to love those who were suffering, and his father, Blood, had also taught him to move forward without fear. Those words were still deeply imprinted in Will's mind. So Will decided to help them. He spoke up, asking the villagers to spare Menel's group, and he would pay compensation for them. This custom of compensation existed everywhere, so Will just needed one more reasonable excuse to be accepted. Will pointed at Menel, letting everyone know that his parents had also been harmed by demons, and he had sworn to kill all demons. So now, when a village was he couldn't turn a blind eye. Then Will brought out his money bag. With this amount, Will could both ransom Menel's group and hire the villagers. With their help, the survivors from the neighboring village were brought here to be cared for, and Menel was also hired by Will to kill demons with him. Although he didn't like it at all, because he needed money, Menel had to help Will. The two of them entered the forest together. When asked by Menel about the plan, Will calmly replied that there was no plan at all. Time was gold. They would just charge straight at the demons' faces without needing to overthink it. Will and Menel wandered through the forest. With Menel's skills, he easily found Will an extremely safe place to spend the night. During dinner, Menel reminded Will again that he was only responsible for guiding Will to the village, not for fighting alongside him. Hearing this, Will still smiled, saying it was fine, he could completely do it alone. After eating, Menel rolled over and went to sleep. Despite Will's efforts to continue the conversation, Menel remained cold and didn't respond. The next morning, Will and Menel continued their journey. They passed by some ruins when Menel told Will to stay behind. The village was just ahead, so he decided to scout a bit. Shortly after, Menel returned with a lot of information. It seemed the demons were having some kind of ritual. Menel immediately drew a map on the ground to help Will understand the situation better. In the center of the village was a church with a magic circle drawn around it. The demons were likely performing a ritual inside. Outside, there were two demon captains guarding, and inside was a beast. Just from the description alone, Will could immediately guess what species they belonged to. If it was just these creatures, Will was completely confident he could defeat them, so he set off to rescue the village. The demons who were praying immediately received a spear through their sides. Seeing this, the beast rushed to attack Will, who chanted a spider web spell to bind it first. Then he took care of the remaining demon captain. Will turned around and used a sticking spell to knock down the reinforcements. Fought with the beast. Will was still way above the beast's level. He lunged forward and stabbed it in the throat. Then followed up with a destructive magic spell, sending the beast straight to the counting board. Just as he was about to finish off the remaining ones at the door, they suddenly fell down. It was Menel who had shot them despite saying he wouldn't join the fight. He ended up taking action after all. Menel approached with a suspicious expression toward Will. How the hell could Will be this strong? Will just smiled and made up a silly excuse, then urged Menel to check the village, hoping there were still survivors. At this point, Will ran to the nearby corpses. He clasped his hands in prayer for them to depart peacefully. Then Will and Menel patrolled around the village. Just when they thought no one was left alive, a voice called out to Menel. From the ruins, a severely burned person crawled out, smiling at Menel. When the demons came to the village, she had tried to hide. Although severely burned, she had remained strong, not making a sound because she believed to save her. Now that Menel had indeed returned, she was very happy. The girl reached out, wanting Menel to take her hand, but Menel just stood frozen. So Will picked up the girl, patted her head, and encouraged her, saying she was very brave. When reminded by Will, Menel finally regained his composure and took her hand to comfort her. Because she was too severely burned to be saved, Will prayed to the goddess Gracefield to let her pass peacefully. After sending the girl to heaven, Menel apologized to Will. At first, he had thought Will was just a rich young master, boasting about being blessed by the gods, but now Menel saw he was wrong. Will was truly a kind-hearted person. Afterward, Menel no longer hesitated. He and Will held the hands of the deceased, guiding them into the cycle of reincarnation. When Will thought they were done, Menel wanted to go to one more place. He led Will to the door of a house. Menel took a deep breath and called out loudly for Mrs. Marple. From inside, Mrs. Marple happily came out to greet Menel. Will was... She was a ghost of the same level as Gus. If they really had to fight, it would be quite tense. Seeing Will being so cautious of her, Mrs. Marple approached to reassure him. Her mind was still very clear and unaffected, so Will didn't need to worry. Then Menel introduced Will to her. With Will's skills, Menel believed he could guide Mrs. Marple into the cycle of reincarnation, so he decided to bring Will here. Menel took responsibility for handling the others, but Mrs. Marple had to return to the cycle of reincarnation immediately. Hearing this, Mrs. Marple moved closer to Menel. These words from Menel, she could tell they were lies just by listening. His mouth always pretended to be cold, but she knew Menel wasn't that kind of person, and it didn't suit him to go robbing at all. These words from her made Menel explode. She was dead. The village had been attacked by evil demons, and not many had survived. What did she want him to do now? Sit and beg the gods? The gods had never helped him before. Menel angrily punched repeatedly, but since she was a ghost, he couldn't hit her. Then Menel collapsed, helpless and crying. The lifespan of a half-elf was too long. Menel had endured suffering for too long. Now he just wanted to go with Mrs. Marple. At this point, Mrs. Marple still smiled and encouraged Menel. She knew he was a good-hearted young man. There were still too many things in this world that Menel didn't know yet. Although Menel hated the gods, she believed they still loved him, so she hoped Menel would follow the light at the end of the road, and he would find his reason for living. With those words, she turned to Will, showing him the mountain behind the village. That was where the leader of the demon pack lived. It seemed they were planning something, and she believed Will and Menel knew what to do. Now Will understood why Mrs. Marple still lingered in this world. The god had been right beside her, and it was time for her to leave. In her final moments, Mrs. Marple still smiled and wished for Menel to live an optimistic and peaceful life. After entrusting the young man to Will, she was to depart. A few days later, the people from the village returned. Although very shocked, they still tried to put their tears aside and helped Will build tombs and hold memorial services for the deceased. After the ceremony came a grand feast. Will partied hard until nightfall. After the feast, he fumbled around looking for Menel. Sitting beside him, Menel told Will the story of Mrs. Marple. To Menel, she was a very peculiar person. Menel was born in a forest in the northern grassland continent. Menel's mother was curious. She had voluntarily left the village, bringing back a man who was Menel's father, and gave birth to him. Because half-elves matured faster than elves, Menel was considered a disgrace to the tribe. Unable to bear this humiliation and contempt, when he was old enough, he was determined to leave the village. The human world wasn't much better, but at least meeting strangers would be more comfortable. Then Menel became an adventurer, exploring ruins in the south, until he was betrayed by someone in his team. During the distribution of spoils that everyone's food, Menel had almost died too, but thanks to his elven blood, he was lucky to survive. After dealing with that scum, Menel wandered for who knows how long, then collapsed in front of a village. That was when Mrs. Marple appeared and took care of him. At that time, she was still a beautiful young lady. Thanks to Marple's help, Menel had a place to stay. Days passed peacefully until the demons came to destroy the village. Witnessing this scene, living longer than everyone else made Menel feel so weary. Having finished telling his story, Menel felt better. Before Will, he knelt down, hoping Will would guide him on the path ahead, vowing to the goddess of light that he would use his entire life to redeem his mistakes. Will also smiled, accepting Menel's request. He would be the mediator, connecting Menel with the gods. Although many things had happened, now Menel understood. Following the wishes of the respectable Mrs. Marple, he would continue to live a happy life. Afterward, Will and Menel returned to the village to continue the feast. With Menel's shoulder while drinking, Will remembered his parents and proudly told them that this was the first friend in his life. The efforts to rebuild the village began to face difficulties. Livestock had been completely killed, and no farming tools remained. At this rate, the farmers would have to consider going to white sales to buy more things, but it seemed they didn't have enough money. Will stood on the side, listening curiously, not knowing what white sales they were talking about. If possible, he wanted to know more about its history too. Menel listened and his face went blank. Just how rural was Will to not know about that place? Then Menel explained thoroughly to him. The place where they were standing was at the southern border. 200 years ago, this place had been attacked by evil demons. Although heroes had tried their best to destroy the Demon King, the people still had to evacuate from this area. They went north and established the fertile empire there. White Sails was the settlement center of these people. According to what Menel knew, the southern continent used to worship the goddess Gracefield. But after this great migration, their faith had decreased significantly. That was understandable with houses destroyed and demons everywhere. Who could still care about the gods? As a missionary, Will's mission was to restore their faith. But that was a future matter. Let's stop this past story here. For now, they needed to restore this village first. Regarding money, Will invited Menel to explore ruins with him. The money would be divided equally between the two. With Will's skill in finding ruins, very quickly they had accumulated enough money to rebuild the village. They were happily on their way back when suddenly they heard cries for help. Two people were being chased by a giant ape. To prevent the giant ape from stealing the young man's belongings, the girl had thrown a stone to attract its attention. The ape angrily turned to attack the girl, but Will had timely shielded in front of it. Blood had once taught him that when facing wild animals, running away or turning back would certainly lead to defeat. So Will just stared at the giant ape, and it stared back at Will. The giant ape finally left. Will also sighed in relief when he didn't have to fight it. He turned to check if the girl was okay, and at this moment, her eyes brightened. Facing off against the giant ape with just his gaze, Will was definitely an explorer. The girl happily introduced herself and the man beside her. She was B, a wandering singer, and the man was Tonio, a wandering merchant whose guild had gone bankrupt. Will also happily introduced himself to them. He was a divine messenger serving the goddess Gracefield. Will revealed something about himself that made the girl B even more excited. The southern continent was a place of worship, but this was the first time she had seen a divine messenger like this. Then Menel cut in to ask Tonio why they were alone in this forest. Hearing this, Tonio immediately explained. Currently, they were returning to White Sails City. Because they were traveling through the beast forest, they had hired quite a few guards. However, when those guards saw monsters, they immediately ran away, which was why they had fallen into that situation. Menel heard this and immediately burst out laughing, then turned to lightly remind Will this was a business matter not to interfere with. Then Menel offered to take Tonio and B to White Sails for a favor from them. The favor Menel needed was very simple. He just wanted to buy cattle and horses from the city. So Tonio immediately agreed. With the decision made, the group set off, with Menel leading them to his town first. The girl B was very enthusiastic, standing out wherever she went. To welcome this new town, she played a piece of music. While she played the violin, Tonio took the opportunity to trade. Looking at the way he cared for and advised customers, Menel confirmed that he had indeed worked in a merchant guild before. At this point, Tonio suddenly ran to find Will, asking if he could use his blessing to heal wounds. Will could do this, so Tonio gave him a proposal. With his healing skills, Will had healed a girl's scar. When asked about the price, Will didn't accept money, reasoning that this was a blessing from the divine. They could buy goods to support Tonio. After finishing in this village, the group continued through other villages, combining B's singing ability, Will's healing of illnesses, and letting Tonio sell goods. This way, the group didn't need to worry about travel expenses. After 10 days of travel, they reached a wheat field. It was already dark, so they decided to stop here. Because B was very happy, she decided to gift everyone a song. Recently, she had been singing the same hit songs over and over, so after thinking for a while, she decided to sing them the Song of the Hero, the Holy Maiden, and the Wandering Sage. Will sat and listened attentively to every word. This wasn't just a song, it was history about this famous exploration group. The story took place when they were still an exploration team. They passed by a village being ravaged by a dragon. To stop it, the entire village had to sacrifice one person each period. Mary wanted to help, Blood didn't want to do it without payment, and Gus didn't say anything at all. Boy came to find Blood's group. The boy brought out a few silver coins and begged for their help. Blood looked into the boy's determined eyes and laughed. This kid was very much like a warrior ready to throw away his self-respect to save others. If that was the case, Blood decided to help. The battle took place with Mary tying herself to a cross to lure the dragon. Just as it rushed toward her, Gus hit it with a binding magic spell. Mary also freed herself and joined forces with Gus. Just waiting for this moment, Blood rushed out and cut the dragon's throat. After the battle, Mary returned the money to the two kids, to prevent them from feeling guilty. Gus made up a reason that it was a loan, a high-interest loan, lent so that they could have a new life, better and more developed. And when both kids had made a name for themselves, Gus promised to come find them to collect this debt. The song ended here, and B had some side notes to tell Will's group. That boy later became known as Count Dagger of the Fertile Kingdom, and the elf girl was the boy's wife. Her had been dead for a long time, due to the elf's physique. His wife was still alive, still waiting for the day the sage would come to find them, to repay the debt of gratitude from the past. And that was the entire story of the heroic song about the three heroes of the past. Will listened and was moved to tears. He was happy because the outside world still had people who remembered his parents. The next morning, while Will was practicing, Tonio came to find him. Just by looking, he knew the spear Will was holding was a masterpiece. And there was something he was curious about and wanted to ask Will. What was his wish? Tonio himself was a merchant who had met too many people in this world already. From nobles to slaves, he understood them all. However, Will was different. Will was brave and strong, without any greed for money. He was completely different from those nobles out there, exactly like the legendary Holy Knight that Tonio had heard about. That's why Tonio decided to ask Will directly. Facing Tonio's question, Will confidently answered. Small, warm family, but he lost his family just as he was about to come of age. Then he received the blessing of the gods. The reason Will went out into the outside world was to repay the kindness of those who raised him, to repay the grace of the goddess. Will wanted friends, wanted more companions. After listening, Tonio smiled, then decided to accompany Will from now on. After finishing breakfast, they continued their journey. On the way, Tonio told them some interesting things. The royal capital was currently in a period of transition for the heir, but because the current successor, Prince Owen, had nothing outstanding, the vassals had objected and begun to migrate south. Owen's younger brother, Prince Ethel, was pushed to White Sail City. Compared to his brother, Prince Ethel was extremely outstanding. Thanks to him, White Sail City had developed very prosperously. While listening attentively, suddenly B ran over and pulled Will's sleeve, showing him a very beautiful scene, the view of White Sail City developing from above. A scene Blood, Mary, and Gus had fought to achieve an era like now. The group entered White Sail City together. This place had no checkpoint for entry permits, which made Will somewhat curious, so Tonio explained to him that this was Prince Ethel's policy. Since a large amount of supplies came to this city by ship, if they were forced to stop for inspection at the city gate, this place would likely turn into a smuggling den. So Prince Ethel had calculated very carefully. Instead of setting up checkpoints, he collected taxes from these merchant ships, plus from merchants with shops in the city. This way, goods circulated within the city at maximum efficiency. B didn't like these political stories at all. This was Will's first time in this city, so he should enjoy the fun things first. Then B pulled Will's hand and introduced him to places everywhere, the bustling shopping district with valuable gemstones. One surprise after another came, making Will very excited. At this point, he saw a pole by the road. Seeing that rural Will didn't know what had to explain to him that this was a street lamp. In the evening, the apprentice sages of the city would light these lamps so that at night, the city could still be brilliantly lit. Tonio was always in money-making mode. According to him, these street lamps could earn a not small amount of money for the apprentice sages, plus that place too. Hearing this, B immediately knew which place Tonio was referring to, the largest public bath in White Sail City. Will's eyes brightened. A public bath. He definitely had to try it. So the group went there to experience it. The water was as clear as in a stream, which surprised Will. Not only was there a bath, but there was also a sauna. After experiencing the public bath, B led everyone to a nearby restaurant for a meal. All the food that Will tasted elevated his taste buds to a new level. This was the first time he had tasted such delicious dishes since leaving the temple. This was precisely the taste of the era, the taste of advancement and development. After finishing the meal, Will needed to go to the church. The three men, B and Tonio, waited outside while he went in. Will stepped into this place, which was like a tourist spot. Everything was beautiful like a painting and spacious too. Will approached a man to ask for directions. After learning that Will was a divine messenger serving the goddess of light, Gracefield, he felt a bit troubled because the goddess Gracefield didn't have many worshippers, so he wanted to ask Will's permission to verify first. Will immediately agreed, thinking to himself that as a messenger of an unknown deity, it was natural that few people knew about him. They were right to do this, lest someone worshipping an evil god enter and cause trouble. Although he wanted to resolve Will's matter immediately, currently, the divine messengers capable of verification were not here, so Will would probably have to wait for a while. Just then, a middle-aged old man approached and scolded the guide. Will immediately introduced himself to him. He was Bagley, the caretaker of this church. Just as Will wanted to use his blessing to prove he was a divine messenger of Gracefield, the man became irritated and scolded Will. Young divine messengers always used blessings to prove themselves, but didn't understand the meaning of being a divine messenger at all. Will listened silently. Indeed, as the church caretaker, every word of his was completely like what Gus had reminded him. To prove Will's identity, Bagley gave him a question to answer. What was the mission of a divine messenger, and what did Will appreciate most about the goddess of light? Will answered this question very fluently, which made Bagley somewhat less suspicious of him. So Will successfully got his permission to visit the temple. After the tour, Will returned to the room and curiously asked everyone about this high priest. According to what Tonio knew, he was famous for being quite crude and even had underground connections with the merchant guilds in the city. But anyway, Tonio advised Will not to bother with him. They should think about the next sightseeing destination instead. Just then, a bell rang continuously, making B immediately recognize it as an alarm bell. Outside the window, citizens were shouting because of the appearance of a dragon ravaging the city. Wherever it flew, city houses collapsed. Will ran straight to the top of the temple to look at the city. It was in ruins and smoke after what the dragon had caused, and it was still continuing to increase casualties. Will couldn't accept this. The city that his parents had sacrificed to protect couldn't be destroyed like this. Will immediately used lightning magic to shoot at it. If he missed, he would keep shooting until he hit it. At this point, Menel appeared and scolded Will repeatedly. The opponent was a dragon, so Will couldn't be careless like that. Will now calmed down and asked Menel to assist him. He went down to ask B and Tonio to evacuate the people in the church, then began chanting spells with Menel. A spider web imbued with lightning was created by Will. Then, with the help of the wind spirit, it flew to catch the dragon. Although it couldn't hold for long, it was enough to attract the dragon's attention. Angered, it rushed toward Will's location. Will his hands in prayer, creating a protective layer around the church. The extremely strong impact of the dragon immediately shattered the protective layer. This was also when Menel cast the spell, creating a strong wind that blew the dragon away. It staggered and fell straight into the courtyard in front of the church. The opportunity had come. Will added a binding magic spell, then used acceleration to rush very quickly to stab the spear into its chest. It still wasn't enough. The stab couldn't kill the dragon immediately. In fact, it was about to breathe fire in this area. There were many people around. Will was confused, not knowing what to do now. At this moment, Will remembered what blood had taught him. He rushed forward, hugging the dragon's neck and squeezing tightly. If you don't know what to do, use your muscles. With his muscles, Will squeezed until the dragon stopped breathing before letting go. As the dragon fell, Tonio ran over, holding Will's hand, thanking him for driving away the dragon to help the citizens. Following that was B and the applause of gratitude from the surrounding people. Afterward, Will and Menel helped these people rebuild the city until late afternoon, when a pastor ran to find him, conveying that the city lord, Prince Ethel, invited Will to his mansion. Prince Ethel personally called Will here to thank him for defeating the dragon and saving the city. As the administrator, he wanted to thank Will grandly, then asked Will if he had any wishes. Regarding wishes, Will told him about the Beast Forest, where villages were attacked by monsters, and asked Prince Ethel to dispatch troops to help. The prince heard and immediately refused. This couldn't be done because the monsters in that forest had a poison called miasma. Normal people would go crazy just by inhaling it, so attacking the Beast Forest was too dangerous. After hearing this, Will switched to another wish. If the prince couldn't help with this matter, then Will wanted to use his own money to establish a group of mercenaries. He would personally go to conquer that forest. Will was very confident in his skill or the suffering creatures in that area anymore. Hearing these words, Prince Ethel's eyes narrowed. Will was an extraordinary person, but perhaps he had to kill him here. Will completely understood what Prince Ethel wanted to say. A hero with no clear origin, wanting to gather an army to attack monsters in an area outside the Lord's control, would certainly be a threat to the prince. Looking at the prince's expression, it seemed he wasn't joking, just waiting for Will's next action. Will turned to look at the two soldiers beside Ethel. He could completely handle the two of them, but doing so would go against the will of the gods. He needed to think carefully, to come up with a way to escape this situation, to find a reason to make the prince change his mind. Then Will began his speech. He was a divine messenger of the goddess of light Gracefeel, who would bring light to the darkest places. As a divine messenger, of course, he would have to be a pioneer more than anyone else. Will placed his hand on his chest and confidently told the prince that he had to bring light to creatures crying. Had to be the one to show them the way. Then Will stood up and knelt before the prince, asking for his permission to carry out the plan. After listening, the prince reminded Will that the path he had chosen was a very dangerous one, and even if he allowed Will to proceed, there was no guarantee that anyone would follow Will into such a dangerous place. Will still looked at the prince with determined eyes. Despite difficulties and dangers, he would definitely kick the butts of those who dared to taint this world. Immediately, the prince burst out laughing. Now he had confirmed that Will was a high-level divine messenger, and also had an interesting companion. Seeing that Will didn't quite understand what he said, the prince explained more about Menel. Just now, when he mentioned killing Will, Menel had stared at him with full killing intent. At this moment, there was a loud voice outside the door. Bishop Bagley just barged into the room, blaming the prince. Clearly, Will had already been registered in his temple, yet the prince had called Will here without going through his temple. This temple at all. Hearing this, Prince Ethel still smiled, saying that him calling was one thing, but whether to come or not was up to Will. Moreover, the people at the temple were very supportive of Will coming here. This statement made Bishop Bagley very angry, promising that later he would go back and scold these people. That was enough teasing. Prince Ethel stopped the bishop, then told him about Will's story just now. It would be a lie if Ethel hadn't intended to kill Will earlier. But after seeing him so confident and straightforward, the prince also had an idea for Will. He decided to bestow the title of knight on him, and the bishop's church would take care of blessing Will. From now on, Will would be under the supervision of both the prince and the church. Hearing this, the bishop hurriedly stopped the prince. This was too sudden. He couldn't agree immediately and wanted to ask the prince for some time to think more. With those words, he called Will to leave with him. On the way, Bagley was very angry because Will acted according to his own will. Menel stood up back to him. So Menel had an argument with Bagley, while Will moved closer to the girl accompanying him. She was Bagley's daughter. She told Will about the past and the good things Bagley had done for this city. After listening, Will had a different view of him. Although Bagley was a difficult person, he was also someone who made great contributions to society and had very loyal subordinates. Will called out to Bagley and thanked him for helping in the conversation with the prince just now. Bagley looked at Will, then narrowed his eyes and criticized him. He still had to think more about the prince's proposal, so he asked Will to return to the church before this evening's mass. Will heard evening mass and was curious with a blank face, earning another harsh scolding from Bagley. Then Bagley had to explain to Will again. The scriptures had been revised 200 years ago. If Will was using the old ones, he must have learned from some long-lived priest. He asked his daughter to lend Will the book so he could study more at home. That afternoon, Will came to the church bishop. Looking at his prayer posture, Will confirmed that he was an experienced person. Besides his mother Mary, no one could pray as accurately as him. So Will curiously asked Bagley why he didn't pray for blessings in front of others. Facing this question, Bagley was quite annoyed and questioned Will back. What did he think blessing was, and why would a god bless Will? Was it because Will was strong and special? Not at all. When a god blesses an ordinary person, there's only one reason: that God has a purpose that needs to be accomplished through the blessed person. For blessed followers like them, each time they performed a prayer of blessing, they had to think very carefully, not haphazardly like other apprentices. That was the difference that helped elevate the status of a god. Will engraved every word. Outwardly, Bagley was a rough person, but inside, he was truly an excellent apostle. Then Bagley advised Will that someone as immature as him couldn't yet bear the responsibility of a holy knight. He wanted to help Will refuse Prince Ethel. That he had sworn to the goddess Gracefeel to use his entire life to drive away evil. This was something he had to do. Seeing Will so stubborn, Bagley had to agree with him. The next day, Will and Menel went to a restaurant. The night before, Menel had discussed thoroughly with Will no one would just dive into a battle with demons. So they had to target those who valued money and fame. Very quickly, Will targeted a group of people and invited them to explore the beast forest with him. However, when they looked at the reward and the danger level, they mocked Will and refused. At this point, a long-haired man showed his displeasure and drove them away. Will looked at that person and immediately remembered what blood had taught him. To determine how many battles a swordsman had been through, just look at their arms. It seemed this was a very experienced person, his thinking and goals completely different from those profit-hungry guys just now. Will approached to greet him and his team, then clearly stated his purpose for the exploration, to strike directly at the headquarters of the deep in the beast forest. After hearing this, they all knew this was a very dangerous mission. But looking at Will's confident eyes, they accepted to join him, as long as there was food, lodging, and a little money. The day Will was to be given the title of Holy Knight was approaching. He had to learn more etiquette. Tonio was calculating to find horses to help Will's group explore. The number was quite large, making Tonio not know how to solve it. At this point, Will came forward and told him to just buy sick ones. He would heal them all. As soon as she heard that Will would cooperate with Restov for exploration, Bee became excited and wanted to help Will gather more information. It turned out she had known Restov before. He was a quite famous hero in this city. Missions that no one wanted to accept, Restov always took them all. But in return, Restov didn't want any fame at all. That made Bee very curious, but no matter how many times she tried to inquire, Restov always refused to answer. Finally, the day of the title bestowal, Deputy Bishop of the Church and Prince Ethel personally attended this ceremony for Will. So from now on, Will was considered a holy knight. That evening, while Menel was sitting in a corner drinking wine, Will was thanking the Deputy Bishop for helping him with the ceremony. Although he regretted that Bagley wasn't there, at that moment, an eager young man ran over and pulled Will's hand. There was an arm wrestling match on the other side. They wanted Will to join the fun, and also invited Menel, Bee, and Tonio. Looking at this scene, Will was very happy. Now he could spread the ideology and mission entrusted by the goddess Gracefield to the citizens of this city. With full momentum, Will's group and the skilled adventurers began their work, attacking the harmful monsters in the beast forest. After clearing several safe areas, Will's group started transporting essential supplies to nearby villages. When supplies were delivered, the farmers' cultivation work also developed more. They might incur losses at first, but later they would definitely profit. Tonio had calculated and was the one who mobilized the main capital for Will's team. Will let Tonio handle things for him. His mission was only to lead the adventurers and be faithful to the temple. In response to Will's call, the Archbishop had sent other divine messengers to assist him, notably his daughter Anna. Although these divine messengers were young, they were all proficient in prayer and very helpful to Will. Now Restov's team had also returned. His mission was a bit different. As soon as he heard reports of beasts lurking around the village, Restov's exploration team immediately set out to hunt them down. Will looked at the corpses of the beasts that were brought back. Each one had died instantly with just one sword strike. Indeed, Restov's title of the Piercer was no joke. In the beast forest, there were many different villages. Not all villages could interact with each other. They had their own conflicts. To connect them, Bee was extremely suitable for this job. Her singing dispelled the tense atmosphere between both sides, allowing them to put their arms around wine. That was what Will had done in the beast forest. After some time, there was truly a very big change. Thanks to their efforts in driving away beasts in this area, it had become a safe zone. Because of this, merchants had also come here to trade, making the atmosphere very lively. Looking at this joyful scene, Will now understood what Gus wanted to convey to him. The ability to trade and make money was as important as magic. Signs of summer were approaching. Will was sitting in his tent, wiping his spear, when Restov came to find him. Pip's group had gone missing. They were assigned to explore for a maximum of 10 days, but they were already 2 days late. Will immediately realized the problem. They might have encountered beasts. Restov had also thought of this. However, Pip's group consisted of excellent people. What kind of beast could they have encountered that they couldn't handle? So Will decided to set out to investigate this case. Of course, Menel and Restov would go with him. Will asked Restov to find a few more teammates. The group set out. After traveling some distance, Menel suddenly spoke up to thank Will, thank him for everything he had done. Without Will, Menel would have fallen into a deep hole by now. Will heard this and laughed. He also thanked Menel in return, thanking him for helping someone who knew nothing about this world. The group continued searching. When they climbed a nearby mountain, they discovered the corpses of Pip's group being eaten by crows, so they had to dig a hole nearby for them to rest in peace. At this point, Menel discovered an extremely large footprint beside their corpses. This footprint was larger than all the beast types they had encountered before. If they had to confront such a terrifying creature, it was understandable that Pip's group couldn't resist. They had fought very bravely. Will sat down to pray for their souls to rest in peace. Raystoff narrowed his eyes, reassessing the situation, and then reminded Will that there was still one teammate missing. Menel had also immediately noticed that belongings were scattered in a straight line leading deep into the mountain. That's the situation. Perhaps this person had run away when the giant monster appeared. Since they still didn't know if he was alive or dead, Will's group still had to follow his trail. The more they went, the more Will and Menel felt something wasn't quite right. This path wasn't difficult to travel at all. If so, the chance of that guy escaping was extremely low. At that moment, Will discovered there was trouble. He shouted, reminding everyone to quickly retreat because they had fallen into a trap. From the rocky walls, countless beasts appeared, surrounding them. It was too late to retreat now. The entire group formed a formation, huddling against the rock wall to defend. Will buffed the miasma resistance skill, while Menel buffed the wind spirit strength for them. They just needed to hold on for a while, and they would break through. The beasts roared fiercely and rushed to attack everyone. Following Raystov's order, the archers began shooting. In front, there were shields. Behind, there were archers. They thought they would be able to resist, but no. A giant beast appeared behind Menel. To protect his comrades, Menel tried to erect a clay wall, but this beast was too strong. With just one swipe, it shattered the wall and sent Menel flying. Menel was severely injured and about to be in danger as the beast prepared to attack him again. Will was scared and wanted to use lightning magic to save Menel, but suddenly his magic words were blocked. Will took a hit and fell down, still not understanding why this had happened. Just a moment ago, everything had been going very smoothly. The beasts flooded in to attack Will. At this point, he didn't care anymore. Will drew his demon sword and began to kill frantically. The most pathetic appearance that Will didn't want to show was now forced to be used to save his comrades. Will felt extremely guilty toward his parents. He kept slashing frantically until Raystov stopped him. The beasts had been completely slaughtered by Will. Will hurriedly ran over to use prayer to save Menel. Although his head was spinning from using too much power from the demon sword to save Menel. As Menel's wounds healed, Will collapsed. When he woke up, Will saw Raystov beside him. This was a village near the area where they had fought. The Chimera had fled after seeing its companions all killed by Will. As for Menel, thanks to timely rescue, his life had been saved. Will wanted to visit Menel, but Raystov stopped him. Compared to Menel, Will was the one who needed more rest. Will lay on the bed, racking his brain to think. He still didn't know where he had gone wrong. Had he given Menel too difficult a task, or had he fallen into their trap? At this point, outside the window, some soldiers began to discuss. Listening to their conversation, Will understood. The problem wasn't with the tactics, but with the estimation of combat ability. He had given Menel a task that was too difficult, nearly costing him his life. He was walking in the pouring rain when Tonio and B appeared. As soon as they heard the news, they had rushed here to help Will. B greatly admired Will's talent, even when facing a chimera, to protect all his teammates. Hearing these words, Will didn't feel any happier. Because he knew he hadn't saved them, he had even almost pushed them to their deaths. Will sadly left, wanting to see Menel first. Will came to Menel's room and began to treat his wounds, both praying and apologizing to Menel. It was because he had pushed Menel into danger. Will also felt that he had made an extremely big mistake. Initially, he just wanted Menel to be a companion, just like his parents had done, fighting and trusting each other. But that unintentionally forced Menel to take on a task that was too difficult. Will didn't want to acknowledge his own strength at all, because if he did, wouldn't he have a higher position than others? After apologizing to Menel, Will also had to apologize to the goddess Gracefeel, apologize for his ignorance. Now Will had realized the problem. He promised the goddess Gracefeel that from now on, he would never make such a mistake again. He would help everyone. He alone would use his power and blessings to do everything. Will had determined what he needed to do. healing Menel, Will immediately set out, even though it was pouring rain outside. After going some distance, he was blocked by Menel. When asked, Will calmly told Menel that he would now go and sweep all the monsters in this forest, including that chimera. If it dared to appear, he would kill it too. This statement made Menel very angry. Menel gritted his teeth and punched Will in the face. Yet Will wasn't moved at all, even showing contempt when Menel could only do that much. To stop Menel, Will locked his arm and then broke it. Thinking that was enough, Will left. But Menel still wouldn't stop. He stood up and began to chant a spell. With such a simple spell, Will had enough ability to dodge, but Will immediately realized that if he dodged, Menel would be the one to take the hit. So Will took the full force of the spell. Will painfully fell to the ground. Menel angrily rushed over, kicked Will in the chest, and scolded him. Having failed just once, he had already turned into such a coward. Menel shouldn't have had to go this far to stop Will, but they always had to be there for each other, so Menel couldn't let Will rush to his death. Will was very moved by these words. Finally, he understood and surrendered. The rain had stopped, and the two laughed together under the bright moonlight. This was the first time Will had argued with friends since he was born, and it seemed the loser had been him. Then the two returned to the village. The villagers, B and Tonio, were already waiting for him. Seeing Will, B immediately ran over to ask about him, while Tonio wanted Will to explain the whole situation. Upon hearing the story, Rastov had to grimace and reprimand Will. The problem Will faced was the disease of the strong. The stronger you are, the more diseases you have, and these diseases can even endanger Will. Will knew his mistake and sincerely apologized in front of everyone. At this point, Menel spoke up for Will. Will acknowledging his mistake was enough. What they needed to focus on now was the chimera. Having been beaten by it, Menel couldn't let this grudge go. Will was the same. He stepped to restart the mission to hunt the chimera. That monster hadn't appeared out of nowhere. Will was certain it was a product of the demon's rituals. It needed to be eliminated before it ravaged the fishing village, and this time, Will was paying extremely well. 1 silver coin for regular demons and up to 10 gold coins for the chimera's head. Everyone was excited about this enormous sum and agreed to follow Will. Then they spent a few more days preparing manpower. This time, Will was more careful and arranged scouts. There were no trump cards, just being as cautious as possible. With preparations complete, the group set out together. This time, there was also the help of the divine messengers, led by Anna. Will brought the group to the cliff where they had fought before. Having already scouted, this area was now safe. Will let everyone prepare carefully once more, then began the battle with him. The roars of the monsters echoed throughout the forest. They were coming soon. Will and everyone got into defensive positions. Menel and the divine messengers stood in the back. Support everyone. Will buffed the soldiers with miasma resistance. Thanks to this, they were able to hold back the wave of monsters. Taking that opportunity, Will broke through, piercing through the monsters. Then he turned back to look at his comrades and smiled. He couldn't do it alone. After witnessing this scene, Will felt that he was just one element in the battle. Will got excited and led the soldiers to charge straight into the monsters. Back in White Sails City, Prince Ethel had also received reports of Will's battle. Beside him was Archbishop Bagley. While Ethel was wondering if Will could overcome this, Bagley was certain he could. Because if Will couldn't handle such a small wave, he would never deserve their support. Will and Menel had now reached an old church on the mountain. From the outside, it looked like nothing. Menel was about to go check it out when Will stopped him. He cast a spell to break the charm, and the chimera appeared before them. This startled Menel. This monster had intelligence. It wasn't simply a beast. Will faced the chimera and began to question. The monster had a connection to the Supreme Dark King. Now Will understood the problem. This place was like a chessboard. If the monsters controlled White Sails City, the seal on the Supreme Dark King would soon be broken by them. But if Will could eliminate all of them, he would be able to reinforce the seal's defense line. Will pointed his spear at the chimera's face and declared that in the name of the goddess of light Gracefield, he would destroy it right here. The chimera suddenly attacked Will, yet Will could still avoid it and stab back. Seeing that Will was tough to deal with, it switched to attacking Menel first. But this time, there was no ambush, so Menel wouldn't be hit. With the blessing of the wind spirit, Menel easily avoided its attack. Then Menel used the earth spirit to tightly bind the monster's feet to the ground. Just waiting for that, Will buffed with an energy shield and thrust straight into the chimera's side. Menel also stood from afar, shooting to support Will. Will ran around, both fighting and assessing the situation. This monster had 3 heads. Whenever they were about to attack, they seemed to be delayed a bit due to differing opinions. That was Will's golden opportunity to dodge and counterattack. Will kept running around and seized the opportunity to stab it. He didn't need to finish it with a grand blow. He just needed to do this to cause damage gradually. Menel stood in a corner, shooting through its tail. Will seized the opportunity to stab straight into the goat head. The monster screamed in pain and decided to use the dragon's power. Its entire body began to emit miasma. Seeing this, Will immediately told Menel to keep his distance from it, and he would finish the rest. With the holy seal of the goddess master, Will wasn't affected by the poison. So Will, with his shield, rushed forward to block all the fire-breathing attacks from the chimera. Very quickly, its dragon head was also defeated by him. There was only one last head left. Will dodged the attack and jumped very high into the sky, taking advantage of the brightness of the sunlight to blind the monster. Will plunged straight down, stabbing his spear. Now the monster had completely fallen. After defeating the monster, Will and Menel entered the old church, where they found Rastov already standing inside with the corpse of a dragon. It turned out that Rastov had seen Menel and Will's battle. Not wanting to interfere in the middle of the fight, he had gone around to find a way in here, taking the opportunity to deal with the leading monster and claimed the 10 gold from Will. The other soldiers in the team only arrived now, but the battle was already over. They all returned home with a triumphant victory song. To celebrate, B even specially composed a song for Will and Menel. The two guys stood on the mountaintop, gazing at the scenery. The beast forest was now clean, with no more monsters. They knew that the monsters would reappear anyway, but for now, they should just enjoy this peaceful time. Afterward, Menel revealed something to Will. The village people in the forest had unanimously contributed money to build a church for the goddess of light Gracefield. Then Menel asked about Will's next intentions. When Menel suggested of the villages, Will immediately laughed and refused because he was just an explorer. This guy was so stupid that Menel had to rub his face in frustration and explain. From the beginning of the battle until now, hiring soldiers and villagers was all funded by Will. If one day Will ran out of money, what would they do? Not everyone was ready to help Will like Menel. Moreover, Will was also a holy knight protected by the prince and the temple. If Will didn't take on this role, no one would have the ability to take charge. Hearing this, Will broke out in a sweat. Initially, he just wanted to eliminate the beasts, but now they wanted him to be a lord like this. How could he do it? But anyway, Will took Menel's hand. With him here, there would always be a way to solve it. At this moment, Will and Menel were called by B to go to a feast. As they walked, Will reflected on what he had been through, defeating beasts, rescuing villages in the beast forest, reviving the forest into an extremely livable place. Although he couldn't reach greater things yet, the first step for him to rebuild the city of the dead. Will began to imagine that seeing a scene full of cheerful laughter and talk in the city, and he would lead his friends to visit his parents' graves. Just thinking about it already felt wonderful.